What's up, YouTube? Timmons here. Since this month I'm doing my top 10 favorite horror movies of each year, it is time for the 2008 turn. So here are my official top 10 favorite horror movies of 2008. There was a lot of great ones, but there were some pretty decent ones I enjoyed. Number 10 is Killer Movie. Now this also starred Kaley Cuoco about 2 years before Big Bang Theory kicked in. You also had Leif Beaster, who at the time was best known for Gossip Girl fame. Paul Wesley, best known for True Blood fame and all. Had some really cool, future uppercomers here. And this is about like a reality TV show, TV crew who, films like a small town hockey team becomes like the target of a mysterious killer here, and is a meta slasher that skewers, celebrity culture and reality television tropes here. It is a really decent horror comedy. Obviously it is self-aware for the reality show, because obviously at the time this was actually pre Kardashians, and but still reality shows was still pretty popular during the 2000s stuff. We had the Simple Life at the time and all. And Kill Movie I just thought was a pretty cool one. It's love the kills here. It was entertaining seeing Kaley Cuoco, who I've been a fan of ever since A Simple Rules fame, and she was really good in this one. Alright, number 9 is The Ruins. The Ruins is about a group of friends vacationing in Mexico, becomes trapped in a remote Mirari ruin overtaken by a scented vine here. And it's a really decent horror film, a really decent film about survival. Jonathan Tucker, from from General Hospital fame is in this. Jenna Malone, Shawn Ashmore, Joe Anderson. Some cool cast members here and there. Definitely is very interesting. Very creepy at times. A really cool horror film there. Alright, number 8 is Quarantine. Now, of course, I actually rewatched this all the way back in 2020 because, well, quarantines, obviously. Now, this is, of course, a horror film about a TV reporter and her cameraman who are trapped in a quarantine apartment building as a viral infection turns residents into like killers. And Quarantine is a really cool horror film, about like quarantine stuff. I mean, I'm not saying it predicts the future, what happened like years after, but what happened here definitely felt very similar to what will eventually happen in 2020. Um, yeah, but yeah, this is also even an American remake of the Spain horror film Wreck, which retains like newfound footage and stuff. It's a really cool obviously the found footage genre became more popular and stuff, and Quarantine is a really cool one. You had Jennifer Carpenter, Jay Hernandez, Columbus Short was in this one. Really cool one. Now the sequel we don't talk about. Number 7 is Mirrors. Now this is directed by Alexandre Aja, who directed Piranha 3D, the remake of The Hills Have Eyes. And this stars Kiefer Sutherland, who plays a former cop working as a security guard at a burned down department store. And of course encounters evil spirits that manipulate reflections here. And you also had like Amy Smart, Paula Patton, the late Jesse actor Cameron Boyce. This was actually before pre Jesse fame. And Mirrors was a really creepy one. I mean, a horror movie about metal spirits that manipulate reflections is very creepy, and I don't think you'll be able to look on. I don't think you'll be able to look at yourself in a mirror the same way after seeing this one. All right, number 6 is the Midnight Meat Train. Now, this was directed by the director of The Grudge, and starred Bradley Cooper. And it's about a photographer who is obsessed with capturing the dark side of the city, discovers a subway killer who hides a monstrous secret, and it is based on a Clive Barker story, who of course wrote Hellraiser, which also got turned into a feature. The Midnight Meat Train is the whole movie obviously does take place on a train. Definitely has a little bit of a feel of Strangers on a Train, the Alfred Hitchcock classic. I mean, it is a really creepy one, to say the least. Bradley Cooper, it's such a shame he doesn't really do horror anymore, because Bradley Cooper was really cool in this one. It was a really decent horror film, and it's well worth watch there. Alright, number 5 is Eden Lake. Now, this was directed by James Watkins, who recently just directed last year's Speak No Evil remake, and he's directing DC's Clayface movie next year. Eden Lakes is about like a romantic weekend getaway that turns brutal when a couple is tormented by a gang of violent youths here. And this was one of like Michael Fassbender's like earliest roles he did. Jack O'Connell, who was just in 28 Years Later and Sinners, he was also in this. This was one of his earliest roles. You know, of course, obviously he was pretty young at the time. Kelly Raleigh, who of course is best known for not Yellow Jackets, the the Kamikaze Western, Yellowstone. She was also in this. This was like her earliest one, like role before Yellowstone kicked in, obviously, and it's a really cool one. I mean, like it is a commentary on class, violence, modern cruelty. The use in this are really messed up. I mean, it's a really creepy one there. All right, number four is of course Saw 5. Now, this is of course the fifth installment of the Saw franchise, and of course, you know, the, in the this time around, instead of David Bowsman directing, it was directed by David Hacko, and of course, we're like agent FBI agent races to uncover Jigsaw's legacy and here, and of course you got Costas Mailer, played by Hoffman, and of course a new group of victims are caught in gruesome traps. One of which is played by Megan Good, which is always nice to see Megan Good and stuff. I mean, Saw 5 is definitely one of the top tier of the sequels. Some really crazy mess of stuff. I mean, the scene where Jigsaw, like you see inside Jigsaw's head, interesting there. I mean, it's a really crazy, gruesome. I mean, could you ever survive any of these traps? Let's be fair. I don't think Colin no one could survive these traps, but yeah. All right, number three is Cloverfield. Of course, directed by Matt Reeves, who would go on to direct a little movie called The Batman. And this is, of course, a found footage film about a group of friends in New York City who documents their survival as a gigantic monster wreaks havoc across Manhattan. And this is a really interesting little horror film. Lizzie Kaplan from Mean Girls fame, T.J. Miller from Deadpool fame, Jessica Lucas. I mean, definitely has a little. If you really look at it, it was like, let's say, Paranormal Activity, or better yet, Blair Witch Project meets Godzilla. Because of course, obviously, the Godzilla looking monster. And yeah, Cloverfield is a really good one. Really love the monster effects. This was, I think, one of Matt Reeves' like early. I think this was actually his first film, if I'm not mistaken. I could be wrong there, but he did a good job with this one. And obviously, since we ended up having another good Cloverfield film, 10 Cloverfield Lane, and we had a not so good Cloverfield film, which was that Paradox one, which that was terrible. But that first Cloverfield movie is a really interesting one if you guys haven't seen it. Fingers crossed we get that sequel, but I'll tell you one thing, Matt Reeves ain't coming back to direct that, but because he has to get a Batman sequel off the ground first. So yeah. All right, number two is Repo: The Genetic Opera. Speaking of Daryl Bowsman, this is set in a dystopian future where organ transplants are financed by a mega corporation, and those fall behind their payments face the deadly Repo Man. And this was pretty much like blending. Was like a rock horror musical blending Blade Runner aspects with rock. I guess you could say it was like Blade Runner mixed with Rocky Horror Picture Show in a weird way. I mean, Repo the Genetic Opera is awesome. It has some really fun music to it. You also have Alexa Vega, who at the time I still remember her as Carmen from Spy Kids. So it was interesting seeing her very grown up in this one. You also had like Paris Hilton, who had an interesting face scene in this one. Horror icon Bill Moseley was in this. Sarah Brightman, Anthony Head, who you might know as the dad from Buffy. I mean, the late great Paul Sorvino was in this one. It is such a good one. It is fun. Love the music. I'm not really much of an opera guy or anything like that. Like, I don't listen to opera at all. But there are some exceptions. With Repo the Genetic Opera is just obviously a rock opera movie, and it's just such a fun one. I mean, if you guys haven't seen it, it is gruesome, really, entertaining here. The ending's pretty fun. I mean, If you guys never seen Rebuild the Genetic Opera, do yourself a favor, give that one a go. And my number one favorite horror film of 2008 is The Strangers. The one that started, or obviously we ended up having a good Stranger follow-up with Prey at Night. And we had some not so good ones with Strangers 1 and 2 that we just had. And this, of course, starred Liv Tyler and Scott Speedman. And it's about a young couple's quiet night at a secluded vacation home turns into a nightmare when strangers begins terrorizing them without motives here. And of course, we have that iconic line of, "Is Tamara home?" I mean, ever since then, that line always gets Perry. Like that line was even Perry in the Chucky series, which was pretty cool. But yeah, The First Strangers is a really good one. Definitely one of the best like home invasion movies there is. Blending like really cool horror and stuff. I mean, it's just such a good one, and such a shame that the recent Strangers movies we just had isn't so good. But anyway, that's pretty much it there. Here is my quick rundown. 10 Killer Movie, 9 The Ruins, 8 Quarantine, 7 Mirrors, 6 Midnight Meat Train, 5 Eden Lake, 4 Saw 5, 3 Cloverfield, 2 Repo the Genetic Opera, and number 1 is The Strangers. Now there are loads of other ones I could have added to. Martyrs, Let the Right One In. It's definitely not The Happening. That is one of the worst movies of all time. Ooh, boy, that was so bad. Shudder. The Ruins. Oh no, I already mentioned The Ruins. Definitely not One Miss Call. Definitely not One Miss Call. That was not so good. But let me ask you guys. What has been your favorite horror films of 2008? Drop comments below. Don't forget to like, subscribe, hit that bell for notification. This is Sammy Sign.